Hi, I'm Commissioner Raquel Regalado. Thank you for joining us on your lunch break. Today, we're talking with one of our amazing community partners about the different programming and opportunities that we have and how we work with them and how we can work with you to do more and provide these services to all the residents of Miami-Dade County.
And thanks to Commissioner Regalado for this invitation and happy to discuss the homeless trust. Let me share my screen. So again, I'm Vicki Millett. I'm the executive director of the Miami-Dade County Homeless Trust. We are an agency of Miami-Dade County, but I do report to a 27-person board chaired by Ron Book, longtime member of the Homeless Trust in some capacity, whether it's the executive committee, the finance committee, or the full board. We also have on our board 7 appointments from the Chamber of Commerce, 3 appointments from the League of Cities, ex officio seats, including people with lived experience of homelessness, including um, providers of homeless services, the superintendent of schools, and ex officio seat for the city of Miami manager, and other seats. And you can find most of the information I'm going to talk about today, if not all, on our website, which is homelesstrust.org. So just to give a bit of an overview, the Homeless Trust, as I said, an agency of Miami-Dade County. We're the umbrella agency over homeless housing and services in Miami-Dade County. So we do not provide any direct service, but we are coordinating and setting policy and administering the proceeds of a 1% food and beverage tax. So there's what you see and what you don't see. On any given day, about 9,000 people in Miami-Dade County are under the umbrella of the Homeless Trust. These are 9,000 people experiencing or formerly homeless individuals. The vast majority of the people we are supporting are housed in some capacity. Um, some are in temporary crisis housing. That's about 2,700 people in shelters across Miami-Dade County, many of which we fund, and another 5,000 people in some form of permanent housing. So permanent housing typically has 2 categories. It's rapid rehousing. People we're supporting with short to medium term rental assistance, first, last, security, and some extended assistance, typically not to extend over 24 months. And we're helping them be able to afford housing in the community and providing light touch supportive services. The other housing we provide is permanent supportive housing. Permanent supportive housing is for chronically homeless individuals in large measure. Those are individuals who've been on the street or homeless a year or more, and they're disabled. So we support many people in supportive housing. Supportive housing looks a lot like Section 8 housing. It's non-time limited rental assistance, but unlike Section 8 and uh, public housing programs, there are intensive wraparound services to ensure that people stay and remain housed. Part of the duties is that we do a census count twice a year. On the last 10 days of January, we do a count. It's called a point in time count. We also do a second census that in August, we call that our summer count. So what you're looking here on the screen is our last January count last year, and we had 858 people enumerated as unsheltered in Miami-Dade County. We just conducted another census in late January. We're still tweaking those numbers. We did see an uptick, particularly in the South Dade area. I should mention we have a new approach on how we count, and I'd say a new baseline as a result of a new state law prohibiting camping and sleeping, which went into effect about a year ago. We have now zoned our contracted outreach team to cover specific geographies in Miami-Dade County, respond to concerns and complaints, and be proactive in those communities. So with this most recent point in time count, we added additional homeless teams to conduct the count, and we put them in areas they're more familiar with. And as a result of the state law, we're also collaborating with police departments and other agencies that intersect with homelessness more than we ever have. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So again, we are a community of approximately 2.8 million people, and our unsheltered number is typically somewhere between 800 and 1,200 people experiencing unsheltered homelessness, street, car, park, abandoned building. On any given day, as you saw in a prior slide, we have about 2,800 people who are in sheltered situations, not permanent, but they're in either transitional housing or emergency shelters. So how do we do what we do? 30 years ago, some leaders in this community decided there was a sea of homelessness across Miami-Dade County, and they said we've got to do something about this. Somebody's got to be doing something about that. That person was Alva Chapman, former editor, publisher of Night Rider newspapers, and affiliated with the Miami Herald. And Alva called this a spiritual and civic calling, together with his wife Betty, and he was a very influential person in Miami-Dade County. And Governor Childs, Lawton Childs at the time, created a governor's task force, which Mr. Chapman led, and they began the work of bringing together community leaders from both sides of the aisle to make decisions about how we better coordinate homeless housing and services. And so one of the ideas that came out that was the implementation of a food and beverage tax. When you eat out in a restaurant in Miami-Dade County that grosses over $400,000 and has a liquor license, that establishment is passing down to the consumer, whether that be a resident or a tourist, a 1% tax or a 1 penny on every dollar spent in that establishment. 85% of the proceeds with that food and beverage tax come to the Homeless Trust. 15% go to the construction and operation of domestic violence centers. And the Domestic Violence Oversight Board, another board here in Miami-Dade County, helps to oversee those funds. And so the 85% is very flexible. We do a number of activities with that funding. We leverage that funding with both state and federal dollars. And the 15% is more prescriptive, and it can only construct and operate domestic violence centers. So it has built 2 centers, which are overseen by the Community Services Department and operated by the Community Services Department. And it is certainly, currently saving for another center. 3 communities, I should mention, do not participate in the food and beverage tax. They were exempt from the very beginning. One is Miami Beach, one is Surfside, and one is Bell Harbor. There has been an effort in recent years to try to get those 3 communities contributing in some way, because we do have homelessness in those communities as well. And so most recently, outside of the food and beverage tax, we struck a deal with the city of Miami Beach and their redevelopment area, and they are contributing through dedicated funds to prevent and end homelessness. The Homeless Trust Board, I talked a little bit about some of the positions on that board before. Administer the tax. We implement the homeless plan. The community plan to end homelessness is revised every year. You can read the strategies and within that plan on our website. We begin a process every January with publicly noticed meetings to solicit input on new strategies that should be incorporated in that plan. We look at our gaps and needs based on the point in time count, based on HUD system performance measures, based on local needs. And we also liaison with budget meetings and community engagement throughout the year to solicit information on how do we amend the plan or adjust the plan so it meets the needs of the community today. Our board also serves as a collaborative applicant, we call it, for any state and federal funding opportunities dedicated to homelessness. So the federal government, largely through the United States Housing and Urban Development Department, has dedicated funds for homelessness. The state, largely through the Department of Children and Families, has dedicated funds for homelessness. We do within those collaborative applications competitive processes to select providers of housing and services for people experiencing homelessness who will be included in our recommendations for that funding. Should we be successful, it's typically a competitive process. So we fund today about 29 agencies, largely nonprofits. We also fund some municipalities. City of Miami Beach and City of Miami are 2 of them. And we have over 100 projects or programs that are providing the services you see here on the screen. So we provide limited homeless prevention services. This is a distinction from eviction prevention. If you recall, there was lots of money that came into the county for emergency rental assistance programs. Those were eviction prevention programs. We make a distinction between eviction prevention and homeless prevention. Who are the individuals, if we do not serve, are most likely to hit shelters in the streets? And so we are trying to um, really, in the most objective way we can, determine who those households are. There was a large announcement yesterday, a national announcement. We were selected as one of 10 communities to participate in a new national initiative called Right at Home. Is We're trying to perfect assessment and administration of homeless prevention dollars in research-based pilots. We're in the planning stages right now of determining, what are the eligibility and vulnerability criteria that are going to determine who we're serving and who we prioritize, because we know there's tremendous need in the community because so many households are paying more than 30% of their income toward rent. We fund emergency shelters in Miami-Dade County. We have a number of shelters that you've heard of, Lotus House, Camilla's House, Chapman Partnership, um, a number of other shelters in our community, the Salvation Army, the Miami Rescue Mission, Riverside House. I should not fail to mention, we also own 2 shelters of our own. They provide 800 beds for men, women, and children. Our private sector partner, Chapman Partnership, operates those centers on our behalf. One is in Homestead, one is in downtown Miami. And yes, there is a connection. Chapman Partnership was an outgrowth of the work that Alva Chapman and his wife Betty Chapman did when they were determining how to move forward with this dedicated source of funding, which requires a plan and contemplated a private sector partner. And so the Chapman Partnership, many years ago, applied to be the private sector partner off the top. We also have limited transitional housing in the community. There is some shifts in federal policy. We could realize more transitional housing and be moving more in that direction and away from permanent housing because of a shift in federal priorities. I talked about permanent housing. We have a lot of permanent housing in our federal portfolio that is providing short, medium, and long-term rental assistance to households in our community. And then we do some standalone supportive services, including those street outreach teams that I spoke about. And we have a homeless helpline that fields thousands of calls every month and sort of directs people to various extensions that can help them. So points of entry for homeless housing and services. We have a helpline. It's been in place for many years, and it has a number of extensions. Different entities are answering different extensions in the helpline. If you are at risk of homelessness or facing eviction, you're going to be routed to extension 1. That answering the phone is Camilla's house, and they're doing it as an assessment to try to make determinations with the resources we have in the community. Can they help prevent homelessness, or pointing to other agencies that might have resources to prevent eviction? Those 2 things can be different or they can be the same. If you're fleeing domestic violence, our Coordinated Victims Assistance Center is answering that line. A victim advocate is answering that phone, and they are taking that household that is fleeing domestic violence through a separate type of safety planning and assessment, one that we are not experts at here at the Homeless Trust. But we do refer to that extension and coordinate with our partners in the Community Services Department for households that are actively fleeing. I think the difference between domestic violence for the client is that there's a lot more safety planning going on with those fleeing domestic violence, and the domestic violence shelters are undisclosed locations, whereas the regular homeless shelters are not undisclosed locations. Their locations are very much known to the community. We work with the Department of Veteran Affairs. They're answering the veteran hotline. There are a tremendous number of resources for veterans. So if a veteran is experiencing homelessness, we have a menu of options we can offer that veteran, everything from transitional housing to long-term vouchers to short to medium-term rental assistance with dedicated providers who work almost exclusively with the veteran population. New to our continuum is a new extension for unaccompanied youth and young adults. This is largely individuals 18 to 20 24 under the age of 25, could be aging out of foster care, but not necessarily. Educate Tomorrow is answering that phone, and Educate Tomorrow has a bird's eye view of all the dedicated beds in our continuum for unaccompanied young people ages 18 to 24. They also have the opportunity to plug those young people into campus housing and connect them with educational resources and employment resources in the community dedicated for unaccompanied youth and young adults. Homelessness in Miami Beach. So the city of Miami Beach was answering extension 5. They have a walk-in office over at the beach where people experiencing homelessness can walk into the office. They have some outreach teams dedicated only to their jurisdiction, and they answer the helpline for anybody who's experiencing homelessness within the geographic boundaries of the city of Miami Beach. Homeless anywhere else in Miami-Dade County and any of the remaining municipalities are going to be directed to option 6. The city of Miami is answering this helpline. And as you can imagine, there are a number of calls. So if you're homeless in the city of Doral, if you're homeless in the city of South Miami, if you're homeless in the city of Homestead, the city of Miami operators are answering that line. We also have an informational extension, option 7. It discusses, and these are on our website too, dedicated access points where people experiencing homelessness can go to get information, be put on the radar so that we know they're there and they're in need. It lists indoor meal sites, and there are some that we help to fund and offer assistance to, and there are shower programs across Miami-Dade County, so unsheltered people. Let me just point out that the helpline is one way that people experiencing homelessness can access services. We have these designated access points. I can't stress enough the emphasis we put on the outreach teams who are canvassing the entire geographic area of Miami-Dade County every day. They're responding to clients who do call the helpline, but they're also canvassing the streets every day. So they know where the pockets and the encampments are and where individuals might find themselves. And we're also working very closely. We have funded discharge planners. So we're working very closely with the public health system, including Jackson. We are working very closely with the correctional system and the courts. So we are fielding demands every day with an emphasis on the people we literally see on the street and people who are coming out of institutions who might otherwise be forced to discharge into homelessness. With the new state law, we implemented what's called a homeless reporting tool. So if a concern or a complaint comes through a commissioner office or comes directly to the trust or comes to a third-party agency or a municipality, that information is entered into a homeless recording tool, and we've begun training police departments and the solid waste department and the Florida Department of Transportation on how to enter these locations into this tool. And what this does is immediately alerts an outreach team. So depending on the level of concern or complaint, the outreach team immediately deploys to the individual where there's been a concern or request for engagement or a complaint made, and they are charged with being first on the scene. Before law enforcement gets involved and forces someone to move or moves to arrest, we want to be first on the scene to be able to offer individuals a menu of options, let them know of our services, have trauma-informed conversations to see, can we divert them from the shelter system, prevent arrest, and assist them in a humane way. So this new reporting tool has been tremendous in helping outreach teams, which are zoned, understand their geographies in a way we never had before. We are forging new relationships and reinforced relationship with partners. We've trained 17 police departments how to use the tool, and we have several hundred official organizations and our municipalities with point people who are using this tool to let us know how we might be able to assist individuals in their jurisdiction. I talked a little bit about crisis and bridge housing and in our community, just some things to know. Individuals experiencing homelessness cannot just walk up to a shelter. all of the shelter access is really controlled by the outreach teams. They have a bird's eye view of how many beds are available across the system on any given day. And they know whether it's a top bunk, a bottom bunk, a male bed, a female bed, and they are prioritizing people who they see and who are coming through those discharge institution referrals and people calling the helpline. It's a constant juggling act to try to meet the needs of the community. We have the two homeless assistance centers operated by Chapman. Lotus House is the largest women and children's shelter in the nation. They have 500 beds there. We're subsidizing many of them. Miami Rescue Mission is a longtime partner. The Salvation is a longtime partner. Mia Casa, this is a property in North Miami that we acquired. We own it. We acquired it sort of in the midst of COVID. It started out as a quarantine and isolation site, and it's really serving a growing homeless population, which is senior citizens. This location only serves 65 plus. Riverside House is another provider that's newer into our system. And coming soon, we are opening an 80-bed navigation center. This is a low barrier shelter where we want to make it possible for couples who will not come in because one might be on the male side of a shelter and one might be on the female side. We want to keep them together and coax them to come off the streets, and we will allow them to be together. Sometimes people in encampments do not want to separate. They've formed community on the street. We want to be able to offer an entire encampment, a group of people, whether that's 2, 3, 4, 5. We want to be able to move them together with their belongings, so they do not have to separate or lose their connection to community that's created within this encampment. So that navigation center is a couple months away from opening. As I said, you cannot walk up to any shelter. It's all controlled through the outreach teams. Most of our shelters do not meet residency requirements, or if someone's a sexual offender or predator, that's a no-go situation. Our shelters are not respite care. If you cannot complete your activities of daily living, to feed yourself, to get to the bathroom on your own, you probably need a higher level of care like an assisted living facility. We do not take households not living in Miami-Dade County. You have to be within our geographic boundaries, and prioritization for people literally street, car, park, abandoned buildings. We prioritize families with minor children for placement. We do not want to see a family living in a car. Chapman Partnership does the assessment together with the city of Miami of every family entering our system to try to understand, can we prevent or divert that family from entering the homeless system? And if we have no other options, we figure it out. Families with minor children are prioritized. As I said, we have a limited ability to keep couples together. We can absolutely make sure that they enter the same shelter. We don't want to separate families or people who recognize themselves as families. But we do need to separate also adults with adult children. That can be challenging. We can put them in the same shelter, but we cannot put them in a room like we would keep families with minor children in a room. There is concern about adult children being mixed with minor children in a family dorm type setting. As I said, households must be able to complete their activities of daily living, and we do have dedicated beds for special populations. We have set aside for veterans. We have set aside for unaccompanied youth and young adults. As I mentioned, we have specific beds for seniors 65 and over, although 65 and over don't have to go to the 65 and over only facility. If we have a highly vulnerable senior on the street, that is a priority, and all of the other shelters will accept a 65 pluser as well. We have families with minor children and dedicated beds for them, and we have dedicated beds with our sister agency, Community Services for Households fleeing domestic violence. The trust has also entered into a phase where we are doing significant acquisitions. You might have read in the paper, we bought a hotel in the South Dade area. There was a lot of consternation. We converted those units for people in our care, and those individuals are paying rent in the community. I think this speaks to the larger issue in the community of there's just not enough affordable housing, and there's really not enough of extremely low income housing in our community for vulnerable populations and individuals with special needs. So our population, our acquisition efforts are designed to create permanent destinations where we can control the rent, where client contributions toward rent can be accumulated in a CapEx fund for us to maintain those. We are technically the landlord. We're not looking to make money, and it enables us to scale up this specialized housing that we desperately need and not wait for it to trickle in. We're busy making uh, leveraging other housing all the time with the public housing agencies, with affordable housing developers, but we need housing of the extremely low income line to come online more quickly in order to serve people. You have to also remember, oftentimes our population is disabled. They might have poor credit scores, they might have past evictions, they might have breaks in employment, they could have criminal records. So we're dealing with a number of barriers that, as the landlord, we can see past those when not all private sector landlords. This is our ultimate goal. We want to reduce the number of people who become homeless. Can we prevent you from becoming homeless? Can we reconnect you to resources and supports where you've lost contact or touch with family? Can we relocate you to family who's willing to take you in? Can we mediate a situation? What can we do to try to prevent people from becoming homeless? Short to medium term rental assistance, rent in arrears, all of that is on table. Is there a car repair we can potentially help make that and allows you to make difficult decisions about prioritizing the rent, but we can help you somehow facilitate a car repair that can, make sure you don't lose your job and you can get to work. So we're trying to get as creative we can and as flexible as we can, particularly this new initiative that we've just signed on to. That is in the back of our mind. And then we want to rapidly place people back into housing as quickly as we can. We do not want to see a revolving door between shelter in the streets, shelter in the streets. We do not want to see people going from one shelter to another shelter to another shelter. Yes, we will make transfers between shelters. It could prevent somebody from returning to the streets, but the ultimate goal is to get people out of shelters and into permanent settings where they can thrive and self-sustain. This is just a little bit more about us. We have a dedicated fund with the Miami Foundation we are not a 501c3 nonprofit, but we do have a dedicated fund through them. We also have a director of landlord recruitment and retention, Paul Imbrone, and Yvonne Pinedo. Yvonne is an employee of Miami Homeless Trust. Paul Imbrone works for us. We're constantly on the streets looking for landlords willing to work with our programs, see past the barriers that our clients often come with, identify properties for potential acquisition. So that is my big picture, and I'm sorry if I provided too much detail in one area or another. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I don't know whether it's more appropriate to open up for questions or toss back to Alejandro, but I'm here. Well, thank you so much.
Let's see, we do have some questions in the Q&A. I don't know if you see in the bottom, right next to the audio video, there'll be started options, the one with the little red dot. If you have any questions, please write them in the Q&A.
Question from Jesus Fernandez. If you're okay, I'll just go ahead and answer that.
Yeah.
So yes, this is a constant back and forth. We want our shelters to be as low barrier as possible, and the shelters are quite aware of this. And we have standards of care, which you can see on our website. It is not uncommon for shelters to have curfews and rules. And there's both sides to that coin. Number one, these are congregate living facilities with hundreds of people. There has to be some guardrails so that we can maintain the safety of everyone. If an individual is working a job or has a responsibility of some sort with school, all of the shelters with, proof of your work schedule, we'll make exceptions. You can get passes for those types of activities. So we are trying to find a balance between the curfews, and we also are trying to ensure that the curfews aren't too onerous. We're not looking, and the shelters, we're not looking for reasons to exit people. We are trying to bend over backwards to find middle ground, make accommodations. Everybody in shelter, though, is expected to be meeting with their case manager, working a housing stability plan that we will help them realize and envision. We want to hear from clients what they want, what they see as their path to self-sufficiency. We're not trying to dictate to the clients or the guests, how to live their lives. But they do need to be engaged in the services and sleeping in the bed because the demand for the bed was so great. So someone who misses 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 nights consecutively in a bed, that's not a good thing because we know there are people desperate for that bed. We need that person to let us know, why aren't you sleeping in that bed if that's the case? Because we want to maintain, we have very high occupancy, but every bed is precious. Let me look at it. 1, 2, 3 communities. Okay. Thank you for that question. The 3 communities. So there is an additional penny that when the food and beverage went into effect 30 years ago, there is an additional penny that those beach communities were already paying. So that was one concern. The other concern was that implementation of a food and beverage tax on the beach community was going to disproportionately impact them and make them not competitive with other tourism-based communities in the state, Orlando, etc. That had proven not to be the case. Um, um, I don't know if there is, I think it's important to open up. There was legislation passed that a ballot measure could be brought to these communities. A ballot measure was technically brought to Bal Harbour, and those voters decided they did not want to participate. And so that for now is not moving forward. The beach had a ballot measure, and there was some politics involved. One of the commissioners called the ballot measure off the ballot. And then the great compromise was struck where the beach is contributing some dedicated resource to the trust through the redevelopment area. An initial $10 million over 2 years was provided. And there is a sixth amendment to the RDA, not to get in the weeds, being discussed and deliberated right now, that would provide some continuing funding, 4 to 5 million through 2039, I believe the year. So I don't want to get ahead of my skis on that. I think and yes, we can download this presentation and provide it to you. So I'm sorry. I think I got Mr. Hernandez's questions. Let me see if I can others. Elaine. Okay. So our administration is in and around, I don't have the pie chart here, but our administration is in and around 7%. Our total portfolio at the Homeless Trust from just the federal government is $63 million. Our total budget is over $100 million. Our food and beverage proceeds have been doing well. They do good in good times and bad. We did take a hit when restaurants were closed during COVID, so there was no generation. But the food and beverage proceeds brings about $40 million in. Our total administration is about 7%. So you should know that $100 million budget, our staffing here at the Trust is 26 people. I believe our budget is, we have 29 positions, 3 are vacant right now. So 26 individuals. So I see Elaine's second question. What is available for people with disabilities? All of our shelters are ADA compliant. If you're in a wheelchair, that is not a problem. If you have a substance abuse or mental health issue, that is not a problem. Will we make accommodations or try to, depending on what your disability is? Absolutely. All of our shelters have a clinic partner. The partner at Chapman is Jackson. Camilla's Health Concern has Camilla's. Camilla's Health Concern, I believe, is also supporting Salvation Army. The Miami Rescue Mission has the Miami Rescue Mission Clinic. So there is a clinical partner for nearly all of our shelters. Well, I hope I answered those questions. Is there assistance? So yeah, physical disability, severe mental illness, substance use disorder, all of those under the definition of under HUD are disabilities, in our wheelhouse. So it can be a combination of those three. Some of you may have heard the term co-occurring disorder, meaning you have both mental health and a substance use disorder. So I hope I answered that question. Questions do not appear to our viewers on host the camera, so please change the settings. That's for Alejandro. That's a question from Fiona. Now, which agency can provide rental assistance and help with these deposits? So there's not a lot of homeless prevention money out there now. If you remember when the emergency rental assistance programs were available during COVID, there was a tremendous amount of money. The Housing and Community Development Department was administering some of those proceeds. I want to say $150 to $175 million in rental assistance went out the door. The money available now for eviction prevention is much, much smaller and much more targeted. There is not a lot of resource out there. There is some money housed with Camilla's House through the Homeless Trust. It's very limited. We anticipate this new pilot that we're now national pilot. They have committed to a $5 million over 3 years after the planning phase is over. So those activities are just beginning. And we are looking to do there is no question there's tremendous need, and we do see here the number of households in eviction when we look at clerk of court data. But homeless prevention is so much more than that, because oftentimes the people most likely to become homeless are not facing eviction. They've already been evicted. They've been just hanging on in a hotel motel situation, paying a daily or weekly rate, potentially a monthly rate, or they are doubled up with family and friends, and those situations are reaching boiling points. So homeless prevention is much more targeted and can be much more than eviction prevention. We do partner with legal services. I would tell anybody in eviction to connect with legal services of Greater Miami, so you are availing yourself of all of your rights. Miami-Dade County, within the Housing and Community Development Department, also has an Office of Housing Advocacy. Those advocates are familiar with non-homeless resources that might be able to help with rental assistance. Some municipalities have small amounts of money that they have dedicated to rental assistance. For instance, with the City of Miami, I know Miami Gardens in the past, with Miami, they have small pools of money and application processes to help preventive it. How can community organizations partner with youth? Thank you. Like I said, we are in partnership with 29 or contractual relationships with 29 organizations, but we partner with many, many more organizations in an unofficial capacity. Most of our processes for our local, state, and federal dollars are competitive. If you go to our website, homelesstrust.org, look under the provider tab, you will see a whole section on our most recent competitive processes. We welcome, our meetings are publicly noticed. New agencies interested in partnering with us to collaborate with us, come to our Housing and Service Development Committee meetings, come to our board meetings, ask questions. We have email lists that they can join. We want to have conversations, and we are continually looking for new partners. I want to say some new partners recently in the door, the Health Council of South Florida. We're doing some work with them on youth and young adults experiencing homelessness. Educate Tomorrow is a newer partner. We've been with them for several years now. South Florida Wellness Network is just sending applications. And when a new provider applies for funding and is not recommended, it doesn't end there. We want to have thoughtful conversations with those providers to get them to a place where they, um, can really compete, our door is wide open. Okay. I have a question, and Alejandro, when we're out of time, please stop me. I'm going to keep going. I have a situation in my mobile home. It's a
Thank
three
you.
bedroom, but I'm only willing rent 2 rooms as single occupants established in collaborating care center. Yes, we would be interested. So at the last slide in our presentation, I talked about Paul Imbrone or Yvonne Pineda. We'd love for you to contact them, tell them what your situation is. We do and we will be leaning in to shared living arrangements. We don't always subsidize those clients, but if there are clients willing to rent a bedroom and your price point is something that they can afford, that would be great. I would just lay out there that many people on the streets do have some form of income, and more often than not, it's income from food stamps and income from disability payments. The average disability payment is $950. So that person has to get their meds, feed themselves, pay the utilities, and eat. With food stamps, $950 a month. And in the housing market that is Miami-Dade County, unless they're in a deeply subsidized unit or doing a sharing situation, it's very hard to figure that out. So yes, we'd be very interested in learning more about um, your sharing situation and if the price point for those bedrooms that you want to rent are something that clients in our universe can afford. Yes. So thank you. So I talked about how, do you have any collaboration coordinated agreements with rehab centers for substance use? Thank you for asking. So one of our greatest partners is Thriving Mind. Thriving Mind is a managing entity chosen by the Department of Children and Families in Miami-Dade County for substance use and mental health. They are funding many of the treatment beds in our community and many of the detox beds in our community. And some of our providers are also their providers. So for instance, New Hope Corps. New Hope Corps does street outreach for us, but they also receive funding for treatment beds from Thriving Mind. So we don't have direct access into those assets. Many households go through what's called a coordinated intake process. That's not my process. That's the state process for getting into a treatment or a detox bed. But oftentimes homeless clients can be prioritized for these resources. If an individual on the street says to one of our outreach teams, I need treatment or I need to go to detox, we will move heaven and earth to make that happen. And it may mean parking that person, for lack of a better word, into a short-term pre-treatment bed that's similar to a shelter bed, knowing that the next available treatment bed is there. So yes, we work hard. And we also work with providers who Thriving Mind doesn't do treatment for. So if we can leverage a treatment bed anywhere else in the community, we do. I should mention I sit on the board of Thriving Mind, the managing entity for substance abuse and mental health, and our director of landlord recruitment and retention is the outgoing chairman of Thriving Mind. So the more collaborations we can have with the managing entity for substance abuse and mental health, the better. They also received some funding through the federal government that had a team on the streets and working with severely mentally ill people. And that team is not funded by the trust, but funding by the managing entity. And we coordinate on, what is the best use of those dollars to help individuals with severe mental illness. Fallon Green. As a case manager, I often refer clients to the homeless outreach hotline or try to connect with myself on the client's behalf. I'm never able to get a representative to answer the phone. This has been a consensus among my colleagues. What's the best way to reach the outreach team to get a client assessed? So if that's the case you're having and you're not getting any response on the helpline, we should talk about that. I will tell you the helpline is not a 911. It's not a 24/7 hotline. It's open standard business hours. So it's usually 8 to 5. And this is why our emphasis is so much on helping people we see on the streets. But if you're getting zero response during business hours and it's not ringing through and you can't leave a message and a live person isn't answering the phone, we want to know that. If you know a person is literally on the streets. One of our access points is the downtown library. They have social workers, and that's not the only library. We are very well connected with the library. And so we don't want any hidden homelessness to be ignored. Um, we're focused on who we see on the street, but if you are not getting through during Monday through Friday standard business hours, we would like to know. We would like to know that and fix. Yes, Mr. George, you can receive a copy of the presentation. Can you display all phone numbers and contact information again on the screen? Yes. Let me think that right now. That was the last slide. My number, I think, was on there too. Um, I should say my number is a county number 305-375-1490. I don't, you know, field incoming calls like the helpline does, but my voicemail has always offered my cell phone number too. So I try to be as accessible as possible. Um, I'm going to display that number in a minute. Let me get my ear screen back on. But I'm afraid to lose these questions. Let me run through the questions first. Um, what if a mother, which is elderly, and her daughter, which is an adult, will they be allowed to? So they will be able to, we can facilitate together, but it won't be together in a private room. It would be more often than not like a bunk bed situation or, a room with a number of beds. It would be other households in the room with the mother and the daughter. We're not looking to separate the mother and daughter, but they would be with other women in a congregate setting. Only families keep family units together, families with minor children. What services, partnerships are offered to treat mental illness? As I said, we partner with Thriving Mind. We provide case management. Our providers are constantly going through training from trauma-informed care to critical time intervention, just a number of trainings to help them know how to approach and work with a high special needs population. How many hotel rooms you're doing? So yes, largely our hotel motel program is just with families with minor children. We contract with the city of Miami for the provision of hotel motel. Those are largely undisclosed locations. On any given time, we have maybe 80 households in hotel motel, and they are being either exited straight from hotel motel to permanent housing or pipeline to shelter if they need a higher level of care. We we on occasion have accommodation we cannot make within a shelter or a very, very special case. And we might put a single in hotel. It's definitely not the rule. But hotel rooms for families and minors. And let me just say, you can't, as a family, request a hotel room. It's based on availability. If we have a family room for a family of 4 available in one of the shelters, the family's going to the shelter. If we don't, it is on occasion for programs. We can give you the exact number of hotel motel. We report this information report regularly. And the number moves. You know, earlier this week we received a family of 9. That family of 9 could be edited to a shelter once room becomes available or edited to a permanent housing destination. And then we'll have a family of 2 come in. So the frequency of inflow and the is always changing. You have 27 staff. Is there a volunteer? Thank you so much for asking that question. We welcome volunteers. Um, I, I like to plug volunteers into our shelter providers. They can serve a meal, they can do a craft, they can host a party. Um, some of our shelters have casserole programs where they will freeze casseroles made by groups. They can invite groups to bring their own food and serve, or you don't have to bring your own food, you can just serve. We have essentials kits. We're editing people to housing every day. They're missing the basics like cookware, cleaning products, things that you and I might take for granted. that would really, be a boost. So we provide them kits that have like cleaning supplies, cutlery, a pot and a pan. It all depends on what the household needs. And you can go to our website and we have a whole listing of potential volunteer opportunities. Just let us know what goals are. We work with organizations as well as individuals. We had a young person's group who've been tremendous. They wanted to help out. We do special activations for extreme heat. They have done drives within their school, come together, chatting, separated the items, created these care packages. We provide the care packages to the outreach team, and then the outreach team provide those supplies, which can be cooling towels, sunscreen, electrolyte packets, other essentials. Those outreach teams use those supplies to help engage individuals on the street, particularly those who aren't open to shelter, to try to build trust and get them to a place where they're ready to accept services, including shelter. Any of these programs are available for permanent. We have programs serving people with local presence, and we have programs, if we don't ask those questions. If you're on the street, we want to get you help. We don't ask those questions. And do you accept donations of household items? So we don't accept direct donations, but we are constantly connecting donations with shelters who receive them or other entities. Sometimes donations are coming from businesses and they have surplus, and we facilitate that. So if you've got donations, we want to work with you. It would be more likely that some of the shelters who have transportation capabilities are receiving a donation. And they're really the experts on that. Some have the ability to pick up donations, some don't. Um, we're also careful about what we receive. New and gently used are really important. And I'll just end with the two items that shelters need the most are probably the last two things you think about: socks and underwear. Socks and underwear, obviously new socks and underwear, but we have children and adults in shelter, and socks and underwear. Obviously, bedding essentials can be good. Everybody gets a set of clean sheets and towels when they arrive, but socks and underwear are changeable things. So I think I've answered all the questions. Let me close out of those. I'm going to share my screen again so you can see the last slide. So you can email Paul or Yvonne if you had those leads on if you're a landlord or if you had a room for rent, and talk it over with them, and we're happy to look into it. I'm sorry, I didn't put my information here. I'm going to type it in. You have a chat function.
Well, we don't, but I'll happily share that with the email that I send out with the recording. I'll send out the recording link so that everybody can review it. And in that body of the email, I'll include the information for Victoria and
And my
anybody
direct
else.
line is 375-305-375. The office is 1490. My direct line is 1491. And you can leave a message. And if that doesn't work, it leaves my cell phone number. So, I'm not the person to call if you want placement into shelter, but if you need troubleshooting, I'm happy to try to help troubleshoot. So thank you so much.
Victoria, thank you again for joining us and breaking down the Homeless Trust. Everybody, thank you for joining us again during this time. Keep an eye out for more educational webinars coming out from the Commissioner Raquel Regalado's office. Thank you and have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
Have a great day.